Hello. Welcome to I Am Wisdom with your host, Katrina Cavanough. I Am Wisdom is all about the connection between mind work and energy work, spirituality, and finding easy, everyday ways to heal your life. Katrina Cavanough is a qualified therapist and one of Australia's leading intuitives and spirituality coaches. Katrina will be taking your calls and bringing you some special guests. Settle in, relax, and enjoy the healing on I Am Wisdom with Katrina Cavanough on OMTimes Radio.
Hello, it's Katrina Cavanough here, and I am really pleased to be here with you. Today is the first show, and so what I thought we would be doing is spending some time where I can share with you a little bit about my story, talk to you about the show and how the show will be working, and just spend some time just really getting to know each other. What I'd like to do is every show, I would like to start with a little mini meditation, just for a couple of minutes, just for us to all slow down, connect with who we truly are, and set the tone for the rest of the hour. So we'll begin that shortly. On I Am Wisdom, I will be taking your calls, and for now, the way we have to do that is for you to access me via my Facebook page. So my Facebook page is www.facebook.com/Katrina Cavanough. And Cavanough is a funny spelling. It's Cavanough. Now, if you get online there, I've got a post set up where I will be able to take your questions, because I want I Am Wisdom to be all about you. My job is to be of service to you, and in this hour, this is creating an opportunity for me to reach out to you. So what we'll be doing is each show, any questions that you have, now they may be intuitive or they may be in a much more therapeutic, like a counseling or a life coaching style of question, it's okay. Whatever question is resting on your heart at the moment or sitting within your body, you'll know the question that you have. Feel free to get online, like my Facebook page, and from there you can ask questions, and it's going to be a great place for us to meet and discuss and talk. Certainly being on my Facebook page anyway, each day I post some great quotes. Some are from my own book and my own work and writing. Other things are from other people. I share other people's quotes as well, and other people's wisdom, because really, whether you're meeting with me individually, whether we're doing a session via Skype or face-to-face, whether you're listening to me here on the radio, or whether I'm interacting with you through my writing or through my Facebook page, it's all about me being of service to you. And what I like to do is bring to you the wisdom that I'm given, but also sometimes the wisdom that I hear from other people as well. As you know, we're really all facilitators of a process in life, and I see myself certainly as a facilitator. And my job as a facilitator is to bring you back to the greatest awareness of who you truly are. So hello, here we are. I wanted to begin by sharing with you a little bit about me. Let's do that, and then we'll move into the meditation. So to begin with, let's say that I am someone who is very fortunate. I was lucky to be born into a family where I learnt a lot. I learnt a lot about relationships, and some things that are good to do and some things that aren't good to do. My family were full of really loving people, and my parents were people who certainly meant well, but weren't really great at perhaps loving me, knowing how to love me well. That gave me a great amount of insight into the way human relationships work, and that is sometimes, that information, that wisdom is something that I know that I rely on and draw upon when I'm working with you. Sometimes I'm really obvious about it and I'll say, I may reflect, but most times it's something that I don't necessarily share with you when I'm in session with you. But certainly it's taught me so much about my own life and how relationships work. From there, look, I'm someone who is described here in Australia as an intuitive or psychic. I much prefer the word intuitive. I'm not sure sure why, but I just feel that that describes me better. And I've been very fortunate to be recognised here on a national scale. And let me tell you how that happened. So as a child, I've never known a time when I wasn't intuitive. I've never known a time when I couldn't sense spiritual energy around me, and I just didn't, or I knew that things were going to happen. Always had that gut feeling, or often I would get a feeling that sits across the top of my shoulders, and I know anyone who's intuitive knows exactly what I'm talking about. So I can't actually remember exactly never having that feeling. It's been with me all my life. I'm also a very, very sensitive person, or a highly sensitive person, as some people like to describe it. So that means in every aspect of my life, I've certainly feel physically and emotionally everything. And whilst for years and years I found that to be, I used to see it as a burden as a child. And that's just because the grown-ups in my life were trying to help me with that. And their way of helping me with that was telling me that that wasn't okay and I needed to toughen up. That's the best way they had. But I now know through my own life experience that it is a challenge sometimes to feel everything, but it's also such a beautiful gift and such a wonderful experience, because it means that I know that for me anyway, I'm here to experience my life deeply. So I've always been a very sensitive person. So essentially in my life, that I went along in my childhood and adolescence and survived and got along. I had a wonderful auntie who really helped me, and I refer to her in my book, which I'll talk to you about later. And she was also intuitive and a clairvoyant. So from a young age of about, certainly in my teenage years, she became a great mentor for me. And she gave me very clear messages that my intuitive feelings were okay, that there was such a thing as the physical world and the non-physical world, and that you could certainly move in and out of those two areas of life. I see them as two very, very definite areas of life. I don't see one as very concrete. I don't just see the physical world as the concrete world and the spiritual world as something that is just out there and very airy-fairy. For me, it's very everyday. It's very everyday, and we can move easily between those two sides of our life. We are energetic beings. So she taught me about energy. She taught me about the afterlife. She supported my awareness. But most of all, she just validated that who I am and the way I was experiencing my life, both physically and non-physically and spiritually, was absolutely okay. She believed me. And to this day, as a 40-year-old woman, I say to her, one of the greatest things you ever did for me was you believed me. I would tell you these, what to other people were ridiculous stories, and yet you always just believed me, which is fantastic. So along I went in my teenage years, and certainly was very much into in my spiritual development. But then I got into finishing high school and college, as you may refer to it, but university, we call it here in Australia. And I became very focused on my career, and I set about finding a career where I could help others. And so I've became a qualified therapist. I have 2 university degrees. So really, my 20s was all about completing my qualifications. In total, there was about 10 years worth of study there. And I was just so busy with that and establishing myself as a therapist, and a clinician working with people. That completely was my focus. Around about at the same time, I still was developing my spirituality. I should backtrack. About the age of 15, I became throughout my childhood really, I was very frightened of the area of my spiritual work that refers to connecting with the afterlife and, our souls as spirits, basically. Very frightened of that. So about the age of 15, my auntie said to me, Katrina, it's okay. You can close that side of your spirituality down. You can just make a decision, speak to your spiritual guides and your spiritual helpers, and they will just shut that side of your spirituality down. She used those words, but what I use now to describe that process was I placed some really healthy boundaries around the way I wanted to experience my spiritual self. So from the age of 15, I said to my spiritual guides, that whole thing really, really frightens me. I don't want to know anything about spirits and ghosts and all that kind of thing. I want to shut that off, and I just want to learn at my own pace. And they did that for me. So from that time onwards, right through to a time that I'll describe soon in my 20s, really, apart from the odd moment of a flash here and a flash there of light, or a bit of seeing an energy or something like that, I really didn't experience anything spiritually, or the afterlife, I should say. Instead, I just began reading some great books by an author over here called Dawn Hill, her books, and then began practicing my own practice. I worked with my auntie. We engaged in lots of meditations, and she introduced me to our spiritual guides, and I began working with them, and it was a wonderful time. In my 20s, something changed, and I'm going to talk to you about that. And really, that was the beginning of the next chapter in my life, and the chapter that's really brought me here to you today. So essentially, in my 20s, I had an experience where the two sides of my life came together. Up until that point, I'd lived very, very separate lives. I'd had my mainstream work as a therapist and clinician working with people, and then I also had my spiritual life as two very separate sides. And keeping those two things was separate. It was very important to me, and remains to this day very important to me. And but there's an experience that I'm going to tell you. We're about to go to break, but I'm about to tell you that after the next break, and that changed my life forever. Talk to you in the break. Talk to you after the break. Okay, we've got 10 seconds. Yeah.
The cutting edge of conscious radio. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Have you bought into the idea that you have to work hard for your money, that business is hard? I will share some dynamic access consciousness tools to get you out of your own way so you can create a business that actually succeeds. Join me, Simone Millisers, on The Joy of Business at 4 p.m. Mondays Eastern.
Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community. Are you trying to get from point A to point B and need a little advice? Connect with the counselors at OMTimes Advisors. Whether you're looking for a life coach or a spiritual intuitive, the advisors participating at advisors.omtimes.com were carefully chosen based on their gifts, skills, and professionalism. OMTimes Advisors, connecting you with the best advisors in the business.
Circle of Hearts Radio is a sanctuary on the airwaves. Join me, Grandmother Elia, in the circle on Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern, as I share information to both enlighten and nourish your soul.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Hi, we're back after the break. So it's Katrina Cavanough here, and you're listening to I Am Wisdom. The first couple of shows are certainly going to be all about finding my way through the technical aspects of the program. So I'm really grateful if you can bear with me. One of the things that I talk about in my writing is all about kindness to yourself, and I'm certainly going to be engaging in learning all about that. So I I am very pleased to be with you, and being kind to myself as I find my way through the radio show for the first few times and work out the timings around breaks is going to be something that I'm going to have to practice. I'm going to have to practice what I preach, which is good. It's good. I love opportunities to live my life really and truthfully, and be certainly finding my way and being really kind to myself as I do that. None of us are perfect, and that's something that I think that we can all fall into. It's one of the greatest traps we all have is to be perfect and making sure everything's exactly so. Certainly been one of the lessons I've had in this lifetime. And so this show, I think, certainly for the first few weeks, is going to be a real coming together of me and what I've got to bring, but also coming together and building a base of people or a community that will be listening to me. So you will receive me on this show just as I am. And that will be me with some wisdom and me with a full awareness of myself. And sometimes that may mean I may have some technical difficulties as I'm just finding my way with a new system and all that kind of thing. So thank you very much for your patience as that happens. And certainly if there's some gaps in time when I'm perhaps sitting in silence for 20 seconds or more, you can use that time to really relax and just listen to your breathing as we find our way. So back to where we were, I want to really share with you a story that really changed my life, and this story is featured in my book, Wisdom for Your Life, which is published by Allen and Unwin. And I'm going to talk to you after, it'll probably be in probably the latter half of the show, where I'm going to talk to you about how my life went from Katrina Cavanough, who is just a person on the planet, being a mum and a helper and a therapist with some intuition, to someone who is actually out there and certainly involved with the media and has, I have a beautiful media profile here in Australia, and certainly getting some media coverage over in the United States as well, which I'm very grateful for. So, how did that happen? So let me begin with the story of how it all began. So you have to appreciate, just to recap on my story before the break, there I was, someone with some intuition or psychic or clairvoyant ability. For me, I like to call it intuitive, or perhaps working across both the physical and non-physical world. I shy away from the word psychic, and I think the reason I do that is because not so much of its actual meaning, but because of the meaning that the broader community or certainly here in Australia, places on that word. People tend to see people who they describe as psychic as someone who has a special gift or a special ability. And I just don't see it that way. I see what I am as very, very everyday. And I believe that everyone has the capacity to work energetically with themselves and others, and work energetically with both the physical and the non-physical world. So I don't really like that word psychic. I certainly don't like the word gift or gifted, because, I really think that I'm not particular. There's nothing special about having that awareness of the physical and non-physical, that every single person on the planet can do that. And really the gift is not so much that, but it's what actually happens when you sit down with someone in session and you exchange something that is so profound that through working across both the physical and non-physical world, that person has that moment that really clicks and shifts something deep within them, that from that moment forward they see themselves in a different way, and they see their past and their present and certainly their future in a different way. Well, that is the gift, that moment there. That's the stuff that, is the most important in the work that we do. So I do shy away from the word psychic. I need to use it sometimes because that's what people relate to, but it's not my favorite way of describing what I do. So there I was, back to the story. There I was, I am, running along in my life, being me, and being a therapist and a social worker, because that's my qualification, a social work degree, also a social science degree, but those two degrees go together well. So there I am being a therapist, sometimes a clinical manager, but for this particular story, it was all about my role as a social worker in a hospital setting. On the other side of my life is my spirituality, which I'm living and experiencing and practicing, but keeping very much those two sides of my life very separate. What happened was I began some part-time after-hours work. So I was working mainstream during the day as a therapist and as a clinician, and then a service manager of a program over here, which is the Merit Program, which is a court diversionary scheme. Sorry, court diversionary scheme. Gosh, get my pronunciation correct. And that is for a forensic drug and alcohol program, essentially. So that's for people who've got a huge history of trauma, who therefore make some not so great decisions for themselves and others. And those not so great decisions are what the average person calls crime. And so they would engage in crime, they'd get in trouble, get themselves in front of the court system, and then they'd end up on a program where they were given a chance to address their drug and alcohol issues. And really what that means is, as we know, drug and alcohol use is all about self-medication. So what that actually was they were addressing their trauma, their sadness, their anger, their disappointment, and their grief. So we did a lot of that work, and so that was my day job. And then in the evenings, I would do this work, which is called a hospital social worker. And here in Australia, what happens is when someone dies tragically, whether it's a baby in utero, a baby on the planet, or an elderly person, and every age and stage in between. Those sudden deaths that happen, motor vehicle accidents, maybe a stroke or a heart attack, it might be suicide, it often was, it might be a workplace accident. All of those things that we hear on the news that are tragic and sudden and unexpected. When that happens, in Australia, what they do is we have a social worker on duty, and my role in that was to be present, be on call, be called in when those sudden deaths occurred, and to be present with the family as they went through the process, the practical process, but yet emotionally devastating process of a police identification. And then also, of course, to be present as they would say goodbye emotionally to their loved one who, when they woke up that morning, they thought their life was a certain way. And by the time they went to bed at night, their life had changed dramatically, and someone that they loved and cared about deeply had passed away suddenly and traumatically. So that was my role, and I did that role for 10 years, and we'll talk more about the length of that time later. What happened was I began in that role, and I very early on, when it was only a couple of months into it, what happened was I was driving along with my husband, and I was due to be on call that night. And this story's in the book because this is where it all began. I was due to be on call that night, and we drove past a very serious motor vehicle accident. It was a very hot summer's day here in Australia, and I was pretty tired from a very busy day. But I said to my husband, I think that one's mine. I think I'm going to be called in for that accident. Sure enough, when I got home and the time came and I turned my pager on, it went off straight away and I was called in. And what had happened was there was an accident of a young woman who had died very traumatically and tragically in this car accident. And it was an especially difficult death because, not that any death isn't difficult, but she died in a way where she'd been travelling along with her partner and there'd been conflict. And so I went into the hospital. As I drove in there, to be honest, it was in the early stages of that part of my career, so I'd not ever attended to a very severe car accident. I didn't know myself what to expect. But as I drove in, I asked for spiritual help from my team, my guides and angels. And I said to them, please, God of course, give me the strength to be able to be of service in the best possible way to these people. So I went. My job was to attend first the body of the young woman, have a look at what she looked like, and then go back into the waiting family in the waiting room and prepare them for what they were about to see. So I did that. I greeted the family. I took them down to the mortuary viewing area, and we went through the process of the viewing and the police identification. What happened next was, at the end of that time, it took a long time, and of course, that was the first time I witnessed a mother saying farewell to their child. And I have to say that from that time forward, your life is never the same again. This work changes you. There's no two ways about it. If you speak to anyone in the emergency services, they'll tell you about that. So I listened for the first time as a mother said farewell to her daughter. And I have to say that, without going too deeply into it, but the sound that a mother makes when she's saying goodbye to a child, I tell you, it's the same for every single mother that I've ever, and I've done this work I did that work for 10 years. And it's the most deep sound that comes deep from within the body. And it's the same for every woman. The fathers are different. They express their grief differently, but it's the same for every woman. And I was there and I was present, and I gave the best support that I could. Sometimes that's about giving privacy, and I really relied on my gut to know when that was. And sometimes that's about, being present. And so I would just gauge it and move in and out as required. That process ended. I said goodbye to the family and I wrote my notes up. And I wrote my notes up, and then I went to the car. By then it was about 3 or 4 in the morning, and as I sat in my car, I looked in the rear vision mirror of my car, and there was the energy of this young girl sitting in the back seat of my car. I saw her through the rear vision mirror. Now I'm going to finish this story after the break. We are coming up to a break, but I want to leave you with the point that at that point my heart was in my mouth. I was very, very frightened, because you will recall from my previous story, I was very, very frightened. I didn't realize it then, but that was the beginning of the next chapter in my life. And I'm going to talk to you and share with you more about that when we come back with the break, about what happened, about what I did, and about how this changed my life. My life has never been the same again, and I'm very grateful for the change. This was the beginning, the door literally, and I was able to overcome my fear, and I'm going to share that with you after the break.
Your conscious connection to a more mindful world. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network. What if business could be fun? What if business is the adventure of living? What are you choosing? Where do you do business that makes it easier, more fun, or more joyful for you? We'd love to see where you do business. Connect with us on Instagram at Joy of Business or Twitter at Joy of Business, and share your pictures with hashtags BusinessDoneWhere and Joy of Business. Let's change the world with business.
The truth is, you can't change the world if you're broke. I know, I tried. Isn't it time you turned your life's calling into a profitable, freedom-based business? I'm Michelle Barr. Join me every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern for Sacred Success.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
Hi, it's Katrina Cavanough here, and you're listening to I Am Wisdom with Katrina Cavanough on IOM FM. Thank you for listening, and we're back now after the break, and I hope that you're enjoying the show so far. As I said in the previous return from the previous break, this show and probably the first few shows are all about me finding my way with this new program. And one of the key wisdoms and the key awarenesses that I have in my work when I work with people is supporting them to completely be aware of being kind to yourself. And it's really easy to be kind to yourself when you're doing well and when you're not putting yourself out on a limb and you're not trying new things. And um, yeah, so it's really easy to be kind to yourself when you're not trying new things. But today I'm stepping out into another way of reaching out to people with my own radio show. And so I'm trying new things. And that means that there's going to be some tricky areas. That means that there's going to be some teething issues. It means there might be a bit of a gap here and a bit of a gap there in time. And what I'm doing right now is practicing the art of being kind to myself. So when I finish this show and I get a chance to listen to it over again, and I hear the little bits and pieces that I did that didn't sound so great, or perhaps there were little bits where there was a gap in time where wasn't meant to be speaking, and I'm just finding my way. What I'm going to be doing is really holding myself in a state of compassion as I look over that. I won't be criticizing myself. I'll be just saying to myself, wow, what an amazing opportunity to learn. And that I know that I did the best I could on the day. And that's what I'm giving you right now. I'm giving you my best based on what I know so far. And the more I know about doing this radio show with IOM FM, then the more that I will have. The more you will receive less little gaps, less little bits and pieces where things aren't exactly correct. And the whole thing about that is that is okay, because it really doesn't matter. What matters most is how you feel about yourself. But I digress. I could talk about that, and that will certainly be one of the themes for one of the shows that we'll be talking about. But today it's all about me sharing my story with you. Of course, I'll be referencing my story from time to time on the show because it's just so wonderful, my experience, but today, as I'm beginning the show, I thought it would be a good place to share that with you. So let me begin where I left off just before the break. So as you'll recall, there I was with the very first motor vehicle accident that I'd ever attended to. There as a social worker, and it's a young girl in her early 20s who's passed away. Suddenly and tragically in a very difficult accident. Her parents have been in. I've supported them with the police present to complete a police identification, and then I've supported the family to do their best to say goodbye in such horrendous and intense circumstances to someone that they've loved so dearly. As I said, I completed the shift, completed my notes, and I walked to my car and I got into my car. By then it was about 2 or 3 in the morning. And what actually happened was I got into my car, and as I glanced into the rear vision mirror, there she was in spirit, showing up in the back seat of my car. She was a little bit disorientated, which happens very rarely, and I'll talk more about that when I talk about my understandings about death and dying and how it works. But she was there, and for whatever reason, she presented to me as a little bit disorientated. I, of course, to set the context, you've got to remember, I was frightened. I was frightened because whilst I had my awareness of my own spirituality and my connection with this non-physical world, you'll recall that I was very, very frightened of the whole spiritual aspect of, connecting with people who passed and now moved into spirit form. So when I was 15, if you recall, I made that decision to shut that down. So I was not ready for this. I didn't plan for this. It's not how I, wanted my life to be. I just found ghosts, or I don't really like the word ghost, but the spirit's very, very frightening. So, of course, I immediately shut my eyes. My heart is pounding. I'm noticing she's in the back seat. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was able to recall the words of my auntie, who'd been my mentor and support and guide and gave me a lot of guidance and really helped me to spiritually develop, when she talked about helping souls who have just died. And so I sent her some light, and I asked her to, I explained that she'd passed and asked her to go across to to God, or whoever she referred to as God, and just return to the light and return to love. I said that out loud a couple of times, and then of course I felt her energy shift and move away and cross over to the light. I then quickly drove home, jumped into bed with my children, and sorry, wrong time of frame. So I'm a little bit distracted by a message. This is we're communicating on Skype as I'm on radio. So I'm sorry. I jumped into bed with my husband. Then we didn't have children. What am I saying? Jumped into bed with my husband, snuggled into bed with him, and felt safe once again, of course. And then only to be woken up in the morning at approximately, 7 o'clock by the phone ringing. And I pick up the phone, and it's my auntie who'd been her name's Auntie Gwyneth, my Auntie Gwen, who's been my wonderful spiritual mentor. And she said, I just felt like I had to ring you. I woke up and straight away knew I had to ring you. Are you okay? Something's happened. Something happened. I then said to her, yes, something has happened. And I explained what happened the night before to her. What happened after that? That was my first experience of connecting with those that had just passed away in such tragic and sad and horrendous circumstances. What happened next was that over the next 10 years, I worked as a social worker in that role. And over that time, I had numerous experiences where I would connect with the souls of those who have just passed. I refer to it as soul communication, because I really believe it's my soul communicating with their soul. And so soon after I had that experience, I had a few more experiences. I had a gentleman that passed away through a drowning. I felt him come through to me as well. So I soon realized that this was to be part of my life moving forward. At that point, I sat down with my spiritual team and I said to them, okay, I accept that moving forward, clearly it's time for me to have some connection with the afterlife, for me to have some connection with those as they pass over. I'm not quite sure what this is all about, but I'm happy to do that. But let me be very clear, because you all know that this is actually very frightening stuff for me. And I want you to assist me with my fear, and these are the terms or the boundaries through which I will experience the afterlife. And I gave them very, very clear directions. So it was such things as I will only receive messages and connection with the afterlife during daytime hours. I will only receive messages and communication with the afterlife when I set it up. I don't want this flooding business where I'm just going along in my day and people are popping in and out, or souls are popping in and out of my experience. It's not good. I'm Katrina Cavanough. Or Katrina Waters, as I was known back then, pre-marriage. I need to be able to function in my everyday life. So, and you've got to remember, this is before me realizing that the two sides of my life can work very nicely together, actually. And it's actually all about everyday life and everyday living. But back then I said, this is how I need to experience it. And to be honest, and from that day forward, beautifully as they are, they gave me the experience of my connection with the afterlife completely, aren't they good? Completely in alignment with the boundaries that I set out. And I'm very grateful for that, because it's meant that I've been able to experience my life and experience my spirituality in an everyday way. I've been able to manage it in an everyday way. So what happened for me was that began a very significant chapter in my life. I wasn't quite sure back then what this would all mean, and we are coming up to another break soon in a few minutes, and after that I will then talk about how this has evolved and progressed into what is now my own experience of connecting with people on a world scale. But it certainly was an amazing time, and it's those experiences and those stories that are told in my book, published by Alan Unwin, called Wisdom for Your Life. What happened now? I fast forward a little bit. I have managed to appear on a TV show, and when you go on TV, they ask you to they ask you for what they call a backstory. I've never heard of this word backstory before, but I'm well aware of it now. A little bit in the media. And it wasn't until they'd asked me for the backstory that I actually had done the maths on how many deaths I actually attended to in that 10-year time. And what I worked, because of course you don't normally count, right? It just happens. You roll along, you attend, you be of service, that's what you do. But as I was creating that backstory, I did the maths, and I worked out that in that 10-year period that I had attended to somewhere between 400 and 500 deaths, sudden and unexpected and tragic deaths. So sometimes you'll hear me refer to the wisdom of the 400, and that's why I use that reference, because there were at least 400 deaths in that time. And it wasn't necessarily every single death, every single soul that I communicated with and experienced. It didn't happen that way, but it certainly happened with a lot of the souls that I was present for. Now, sometimes I was present for the death of someone. Other times people would be brought in where they'd passed away out in the community, for example, at a motor vehicle accident or, a stroke or something like that outside in the community, and then they'd be brought in the medical world, we call it DOA, dead on arrival. That's a bit harsh for me, but, that's the way they describe it clinically. So there were some people that came in DOA, to use the clinical phrase, and there were some people that came in and I was present for their death. So what happened in that time is that I became aware, and I learnt a lot about death and dying and the afterlife, a lot about the process, about what happens. I learnt a lot about what death is like from the non-physical perspective. The other thing that happened that was really profound for me was that not only did I have a communication and an awareness of the process of dying and death and what happens, but I also had some experiences where the souls of those who have just passed communicated and reflected with me about the life that they had just lived. And what I noticed over time was as they reflected about their life, there were several themes that were consistent over and over and over again about how they lived life and the way they lived life. And it's been those themes that I now refer to as the wisdoms, and they're the things that inform a great deal about the way I work with you. And I'm going to talk to you more about how I came to be here after the break soon.
Connecting you with the best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
The Laying On of Hands Healing Radio Show is about treating the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. Join me, Charles Smith, as I share life-balancing measures such as nutrition and spiritual practices to help you take charge of your own health and wellness every Thursday at 7 p.m. on OMTimes Radio.
Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community. What if business could be fun? What if business is the adventure of living? What are you choosing? Where do you do business that makes it easier, more fun, or more joyful for you? We'd love to see where you do business. Connect with us on Instagram at Joy of Business or Twitter at Joy of Business, and share your pictures with hashtags BusinessDoneWhere and Joy of Business. Let's change the world with business.
Hi, my name is Monica and I'm the host of Co-Creating Now. Give yourself an opportunity to connect with your all-knowing higher self and manifest joy, love, and peace together every Tuesday, 11 a.m. Eastern.
Feed your soul with waves of consciousness on OMTimes Radio.
Hello, my name's Katrina Cavanough, and this is I Am Wisdom. I've just received a beautiful message on Facebook from someone lovely, and so you may hear that in my voice. It's emotional work, you know. This is an emotional journey, and I feel very privileged, very, very privileged to be of service. And you know, I'm here doing that now by talking with you on the radio, sharing with you my experiences. The reason I'm sharing with you the experiences, and I think the reason why my life has evolved in the way it has is, you know, I really do see myself, like many people say this, but I truly appreciate this very deeply. I know that my job is to bring you information about and wisdom about how you can live your life in the best way. You know, I'm a strong believer in powerful intentions, and I'll talk to you about a bit more about that in this next section, because that's what's happened. You know, I've used powerful intentions to create my life the way I want it to be, and that is powerful, powerful, powerful way of working. But I have to say, I feel quite humbled and surprised, and sometimes shocked at the way my life has actually come together. So let me share with you what happened next, because between having these experiences that were so profound, and then somehow it all coming together, and, you know, it's now a book, and, you know, and I now have a profile and a platform here in Australia, how that all has happened has been truly remarkable. So let me share that with you. So for 10 years, I went along and I did that work, and it was, like I said, very profound work. I didn't quite realize, I know this sounds crazy, but for me at the time, this, as it is with everything, it becomes very quickly your everyday. You know, you go along, you know, at that stage I was also, you know, wanting to conceive a baby, and that's, I'll talk at different times, there will be a whole show on infertility and what that does to you. And excuse me, I need to clear my voice. This is one of those moments of kindness, me clearing my voice. Note to self, keep glass of water near you when you're on radio. So, you know, I will talk about, you know, obviously parenthood, because, you know, that's a huge part of what I do and who I am and all that stuff. And I think there's a lot of the wisdoms that I can share, and my own experience as a clinician and a therapist. And, you know, in my day job, I'm a person who works with trauma. So I work with children who've been abused. But I'll talk more about that towards the end of today's show. But I want to share with you now the series of miracles that occurred that brought me to you. And I have to do that quickly because I'm mindful of time. Essentially what happened was I did that work for 10 years. It became very everyday. I just made a few notes here and there because I'm a chronic journaler. So I made a few notes here and there about, you know, some of my experiences and some of the reflections, but just kept on going along. I was in the business of, you know, I got married, having babies, living life, experiencing my emotional self in all its entirety, which some days is easy and other days a little bit challenging. I'm human after all, helping people, doing the work I'm doing. And then I felt a huge shift in my satisfaction with my mainstream work. I was no longer completely satisfied with my work. I felt I'd gone as far as I could, and I felt a deep, deep, deep calling to do something more. Now, I had no idea what that something was. I'd never joined the dots that this would be. It might sound crazy. You would think, gosh, there you are having all these experiences. Didn't you know that you'd be taking those to the world? I had no idea. I've got people I can tell that I could bring on and testify that I sat with them for hours and hours and hours saying, there's something I'm meant to be doing. I don't know what that something is. What is that something? And that went on for a couple of years actually. But what actually happened was I came to realize that I wanted to write a book, like many of us do. And then I came to understand that to write a book, I didn't know what the book would be about. But to write a book, I needed to have a profile because I didn't want to, for some reason, I didn't feel I wanted to self-publish. I wanted to I wanted to be seen as valuable by a publisher. So I wanted to be published. That's how it was the right fit for me. So then I set the intention, and I knew to be published, I needed to have a profile, a media profile. Now, I have a history of, being in stage shows and performing and all that kind of stuff on a very amateur level, let me say, in my childhood. So I'm very comfortable, and I love speaking. And, in my professional career, I loved providing workshops and training, and I've been a TAFE teacher, which is our version of like a trade qualification place here in Australia. So I love all that kind of thing. But certainly, and I have a fascination with the media. I've always wanted to be an actress, and I nearly studied theatre, media and communications here at uni, but long story short, I didn't, and off I went. So I knew I needed a media profile, so I set the intention that by the end of 2011, so we're fast forwarding to then now, at the end of 2011, I would have a national media profile here in Australia. Again, I had no idea. What happened next was quite astounding. What happened next was I then went about taking action steps as you do, and I thought it would be that I'd be featured on a national newspaper here. But what actually happened was they called for auditions for a national TV show here called The One, A Search for Australia's Gifted Psychic. And to cut an enormously long story short, although I'm not very good at doing that, but I ended up being selected out of hundreds of people to be in the top 10 most intuitive or psychic people here in Australia. I was then featured on a prime time television show, and as one of the top 10. There's a little bit of a story of how I got there. There's two things that happened that were absolutely out of this world miracles. One of those was in the audition process. First of all, as I moved through the audition process, and I moved from one level of being selected to the next level, I was completely shocked that even I couldn't believe it, that I'd even get to the next level, but I did, and I did, and I did, and I did. And then we got to the day where I think they'd narrowed it down to about 50 people for Sydney, which is in Australia, obviously. So I go to Sydney. I live an hour away from Sydney in a coastal area, but I drive to Sydney. And as I'm driving there, I say to my spiritual friends, well, if you want me on this show, you need to do something pretty remarkable. And they did. I appeared in the audition. Before I went in, I received a clear message of be across your clairs, clairsentience, clairvoyance, what they all mean, because I don't describe myself in that way. So I quickly Googled the clairs on the iPhone, as you do. And sure enough, and worked out which ones I use in my own way of communicating. Sure enough, one of the very first questions was, can you please describe your ability or your way of communicating, your clairvoyance, your psychic ability using the clairs? So thank goodness I could answer that question. Thank you very much. The other thing that happened in that audition was I was actually able to sit with someone, and I was intuitively able to connect with the soul of that person and the soul of their godfather, who had not passed away, but they were in a coma in ICU somewhere. And I was able to explain to them that is not uncommon, because of course I've had the experience in the hospital work, and when I'm doing the work in the hospital and I'm in ICU, quite often the soul moves in and out of the body. So it didn't surprise me at all, but it surprised them. It surprised the TV people. And the other thing that happened was I finally then got to the point of being narrowed down, this is weeks later, down to the top 20. And you have to imagine it's a top 20, and we're in this enormous television complex which goes across several, it's huge. I mean, I've never been in that world until then, but there was the Channel 7 studio way down where, and then behind that was it's a bit of a complex area where they used to build trains. So you've got to imagine a warehouse-sized building where they used to build trains. So it's quite large. And on either side of that are mezzanine level buildings and a big car park out the front. And what happened was they asked us to tune into, one of the crew hid in this massive complex somewhere, and they asked us to tune into a jewelry of that person. Then we're given a map, and we had to mark where that person was on the map, and we had to take, with a cameraman in tow, we were given 5 minutes to find that person. And there I was, little old me, in 20 people, with the final 20, all I'm looking around me, they were all people who had some, notoriety and were relatively well known in Australia. And there's me, and I'm thinking, goodness me, how did I end up here anyway? So I was given the most, as I sat down with the map in front of me, after having tuned into the jury of the crew member, a voice outside of myself, as if someone was speaking to me. It was auditory, very clear, deep male voice said, "Katrina, top floor," showed me exactly where it was. I grabbed the cameraman. The other message I got was run, 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 because I'm a very tiny, petite female. Tiny, petite female. And what actually happened was, I ran, and within 2 minutes I ran out of the big building, across the big long car park, up into another side of the building, and I managed to scoot up 3 layers of stairs on a mezzanine complex and find the person within 2 or 3 minutes, within the time frame anyway. And what I came to understand afterwards was that I was the only person out of that whole 20 that found a person in that exercise. And when they rang me and said, "Katrina, you've been selected for the show," and I said, "I can't believe it," and they said to me, "What did you think was going to happen? You were the only person who found the person in the building. Of course you're selected for the show." Now, I don't think I could probably do that again. I mean, probably, obviously, for me, what that is about is not that I found the person in the building, but that for me was a marker that I was meant to be on that show. That and the other experience I shared with you, because over the time since then, I doubt, you obviously have self-doubt, and I wondered why I was there, but I knew that I was meant to be on that show from that moment forward, and whatever came next, it didn't matter. The other amazing thing was that when I, of course, from the show, I did very well and was featured on most of the episodes. I think I ended up with top 5 as the actual figure or something. But in the end, what happened was, I've just realized this is a kindness moment. I'm going to share the rest of that story with you next time. You've been listening to Katrina Cavanough with I Am Wisdom, on I Am Wisdom. Please feel free to hop onto my Facebook page, Katrina Cavanough, Facebook.com/Katrina Cavanough, website www.katrinacavanough.com, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you next week. Thank you so much for being part of this first show. We'll catch up with you next time. Take care, and remember that you are wisdom.